Hello and welcome to the Frugal Frau, and I'm not Sukey. Today we're going to build a plant starter box. It's a pretty simple little thing, but it's pretty handy around here. We just made a whole stack of these, and it allows you to have individual things and then pops this out to make for easy transplanting. So if you enjoy our content, please like, subscribe, and comment. So let's get started. Okay, I've got all my stock prepped to build the 4 boxes. I've got more than 80 inches of some 3/8 inch thick. This is pine of some sort. I don't know what it was, junk. And I just resawed it in half and then planed it down to being 3/8. Some fence boards that I cut down to my final width of 3 1/4 by, in this case, they got planed down to 5/8 because they were so poor. I left them rough on the outside, no reason not to. This is my, going to be my longitudinal center divider, and it's 1/2 inch thick. That's a good thickness for that piece. It needs to be a little bit sturdier. And then this is my cross dividers, which will go across this way on the center divider. They only need to be 3/8 and need to make them pretty loose. We have discovered the hard way. And we'll be using Tight Bond 3 to glue up all the parts in the center divider and the sides. So let's get started. I've got my 3/4 by 5/8 stock in this case, and I'm going to prep it all by cutting a rabbet the width of my bottom stock. In this case, it's 3/8 by 1/4 inch deep, which is not real deep. And I'm just going to prep all of my stock that way. That's my first step before I even cut any of it to length, so I don't have to deal. Here I had to break a knot out, but we'll cut around that. And I'm just going to plane on down, just doing each piece this way quickly. Doesn't have to be beautiful. And just get it done. Okay, I have got all of my side and end stocked. I've got my rabbets all cut. So I've kind of had to spend a little time getting my dimensions all set up. I want my wells to be 2 1/4 square, inside dimensions approximately. And I have a maximum length for our trays so that these can be 17 inches long. So I came up with a well depth of 15 3/4, and I started a story stick here, which I'll finish up in another shot. But this gives me my interior length. So I'll need to cut 8 pieces here that are 17 inches long, so I will do that next. Okay, I'm ready to start cutting out. In this case, I'm cutting by hand. You don't have to go to this much trouble if you're doing it with a chop saw, but I've squared off my maiden end there, and I'm going to be marking to 17, and then I'm going to make another mark at about 17 1/16. So that's my pairing line. Now I want to since I'm going to be rabbeting these end pieces in, make sure that you don't cut an end too close to a knot. This one isn't going to be a problem, but if you had a bigger knot in the middle or something, get it at least 1 inch away from your ends. That'll save you a lot of grief. All right. The other suggestion I have is I always square everything from the bottom of the, from the bottom of the wood. In this case, I'm not getting this the most square, but there we go. It will save you a lot of grief, just as a matter of everything being referential. Okay. Okay, I've got all my pieces cut and they're all squared up nice. Now I needed to figure out what my interior or my end pieces were going to be. So I had to calculate my well depths, which are going to be 2 1/4 each. So I've got 4 1/2 inches, and then my center divider is 1/2, and then I'm going to have 2 1/4 inch dados or rabbets at the end. So that gives me a grand total of 5 1/2 that I'm going to need to cut these at. So what I do typically when I'm building these is I save my shorts and offcuts to make all my different ones. And basically the same drill now that I know what I need to cut it at. So I've got 5 1/2, so I'll make a do 5.5, and I'm adding another 1/16 there for my saw mark. And I'll just mark them. Again, if you're doing it with a chop saw, you don't have to be so particular. Just get them all square and all the same. It doesn't hurt to go a little bit over on this piece, maybe a 1/16 or an 1/8. You'll just end up a little bit wider, as long as you're accommodating your piece that fits in the bottom. Okay, I've got my pieces cut to length now, and I'm just going to go ahead and get all my rabbets cut for all 4 of my pieces for this particular box. This is some really poor quality wood, so I'm not expecting beauty here, and you don't need to worry about it. This isn't fine furniture, but we want it to fit together good and last a few years. If you don't have any fancy tools, you can just do it with a chisel. I'm going to use a chisel and an old wood plane to do this. Just takes a second. These go pretty quick usually, even with this splintery junk. And if you're buying junk wood from big box, it'll be at least this bad, if not worse, but probably this bad. This is about like the ledger boards they sell at Home Depot. Fence boards are usually about as good a quality too. I'll just use my plane to clean up the bottom. If you don't have a nicker on this one like I don't, make sure you've cut all the way to the bottom so you don't tear out too bad. And drop your other piece in to make sure you've got a good fit like that. And we'll get the rest of them made. Okay, I've got this thing, my length figured out. In this case, it was the length of the bottom plus a 1/2 inch. From here to here, plus a 1/2 inch. And that gives me 16 1/4, which I've already cut this guy to the length. Now, I want to cut this guy down to width real quick, which would be 5.5. And I'm not going to worry about the 2 holes in here because that'll give us some natural drainage anyway. So I will use one of my end pieces here to mark my end. Alrighty. Do this real quick and we'll just rip this guy down. Okay, let's just put this guy together. I'm using Tite Bond 3 here because it's reasonably water resistant. Just going to use a air nailer because for this kind of work, it's quick and easy. I'm using a very, very short brad. All it's got to do is just hold it together until the glue dries. And yes, I'm going to glue this. I don't care if it expands or contracts. It's not going to cause too much grief. Yeah, didn't get a real great fit, but that's all right. And I will set a couple of brads. Hopefully they won't blow out. Okay, I've got the box together. Now I need to put my center spline in. So we're actually a little bit shy of 15 3/4. I've got 15 and 11/16. So to start with, I'm going to cut my piece down to that. If I can find my knife here. Again, I'm doing this by hand, so I'm going to make 2 marks. And I'll pare it to fit. But we don't want these to fit too tight. We want to make sure that you get this thing in and out of there even after it swells up with water. Because the first couple I built, well, didn't work that way. Okay, we're pretty good right there. Yep, I've got about a 1/16 slop, and that's what we really want here. Okay, now with that, we can start doing the layout for putting in the side pieces. So let's go to that. Okay, I've got my story stick laid out here, but what I want to do, and I marked all my centers across here, and this guy should fit in pretty close. It may not be exact, but for our purposes, it's good enough. Now what I want to do is I want to mark back 3/16 to the left of each of my marks because my stock is going to be 3/8. So I'm just going to go here and mark back 3/16 to the left of each of these marks. And if I was only making one of these, I probably wouldn't go to this trouble, but since we're going to make a whole stack of them, and I am beyond terrible at math, I'm going to do it this way. All right, now that I've got that, so I've got each one of my marks, I'm going to make a mark just top to bottom. And I've also marked an arrow that goes on my left so that I always orient this guy going the same direction, just to keep everything the same. This is pretty low tech, but it gets pretty close to Eli Whitney's ideal of making something the same every time. Okay, now that I've got that, I can grab my centerpiece that I just cut out here. And first thing I want to do is make an alignment mark that marks up with this guy. And in this case, I have my bottom, which is square. I can see that it's square-ish, so I'll mark it as square, and I just mark this guy on, lay this guy on here like this. And then I just follow my mark. Just go down and make a mark in each of these marks that I made. Now I will just mark these down all the way to the bottom, but not quite to the top. They don't need to go up that far. And these will always, it will be my left side of my mark. I'll use a piece of stock to mark the other side. Okay, so I want to make my main cut, which is going to be from the bottom of this guy up 2 inches deep. So I'm just going to mark that here. And then I'll just set my scratch gauge so I have it. And I just do that. And then I'll go by each one of these and give myself a good scratch. And this just tells me where to stop my sawing. Okay, now I've got a scrap of stock here, and what I'm just going to do is, it's going to be hard to do it in that way. So I'll set my square here, and I just line it up with my mark, put that there, put the stock here and hold it, and then just give myself a good scratch. That gets us real close, and we do want a pretty tight fit with this. So take the time to make these marks and cuts accurate. Remember, you'll be cutting these to the 2-inch mark, because we're going to glue these so this thing stays together as one unit. Take the time to clearly mark your saw cuts and square them up too, in case your board had some inconsistencies in them, which does sometimes happen. And I mark the bottom of my cuts too, just because it makes my life easier. And if you're going to err, it's better to err on the side of being just a little bit too tight, because you can always pare it with a chisel. Okay, now I've got all that marked. I'm just going to quickly cut my slots out. Again, just take your time, no matter how you're cutting these, whether you're doing it with a machine or just doing it with a handsaw. Just err to the side of being a little bit too small if you err on one side or the other. Also, another pro tip here, always start on the outside and work across so you don't have any pieces flapping out in the breeze. So once you've made the cut, you're done and you're not torquing on this loose piece anymore, because right now these pieces are pretty weak. All right, and these guys should just knock right out. I chop them just a little bit above the line. And then just take the chisel, pare down. Just, I find I have less accidents that way. And I get a nice clean break, usually. Yeah, we use the same technique for doing box and drawer dividers, and we have made another video a bit more in depth on this technique. And somewhere up there, Sukey will put a card in if you want to watch it. It's been one of our more popular videos in rerun. You want to clean it up a little bit, but that's what we're looking at. It doesn't have to look perfect because it'll be hidden anyway, but that's what we're looking for our center section. Okay, now I've cut out my baffles here, going the other way, and I've already trimmed them all up. I didn't bother wasting everybody's time doing that. And you want them pretty loose, like you can see here. So you have some pretty good slop in there because they will swell. Now what I've done is I determined what my center is outside to outside, just using this guy. I'm going to do two things here. I'm going to make a mark, an alignment mark, just to line all these guys up so I know where they all go. Now I'm going to mark my center here all the way across. And the closer you get this, the better it'll work. Now I need to add a quarter to that. I almost was naughty and didn't do that. So, my marking knife here. Just get them all the way across. Then find this piece and just mark these guys the same way. There we go. All right, now I can pop that out and saw. Okay, now I need to do one other thing here. I need to take and determine my depth of cut. So when these guys go in from the top, I'll just need to go to right there and a little bit. So when I'm coming from the top, I'll set my marking gauge to that. go. Now I'll set my marking gauge to that, and that'll be my stop cut. Now let's cut this guy out and fit this first one. Just like the other one, except these are a lot more delicate. Just take your time, back it with your finger without cutting your finger. Just work your way down to the line. There we go, over to the bottom. Just get chisel in here and break it off. Now we just pair it to the line, maybe a little bit. Now let's just see how it fits. Okay. Whoa, you put it in the first one. There we go. And there it goes. Goes right together and locks right in, just like that. Okay, I've got this thing all dry fit. You see there's a little bit of slop in here, and you'll notice I have all my alignment marks, and everything is all kind of numbered here because it kind of needs to go back together in the same order. I inspire to do everything, with mass production this way, but we don't get very good interchangeability here. But yeah, that's how it works. Now what I do is I lift this guy out, and they're generally pretty tight. I like them as tight as possible, not in the box, but with themselves. Now I just flip this thing over just like this, and I just take one out at a time, and I want to apply a small amount of glue, and just slam that down like that. Wipe up the excess so it doesn't get to the bottom. Oh. That one's as tight as they all should be. Again, make sure you don't get any on the bottom because we're going to use the box as a drying clamp. All right, flip it back over and make sure you got all your marks going the right way. Pop it back in here. Make sure everything's as it should be. And go ahead and just let it set up and dry. Okay, I've got the boxes all dry and everything. And we want it nice and loose, and I'm looking at it, and I've got a couple. Actually, number 4 is a little tighter than I would like. I like to see, and I don't know if the camera will show it, I like to see daylight. I like to have plenty of slop in these because when they get wet, they swell up a little bit. So what I need to do is take each one of them, and I just take a chisel and just take a little bit off wherever it might be getting a little too close to the edge, like that. Get it back in here. And this one, number 3, needs just a little bit more. Just take your time so you don't rip the bottoms out. And there we go. That's really good. Now, I want to knock a couple of sharp edges off. And it's just a matter of, no, wrong one. Knock a couple of sharp edges off, and I'm not being artistic here. I just want to take the sharp edges off. And at least with mine, they're always a little bit asymmetric, so I always mark which direction the divider goes in. And I like to do it with the chisel. That way I know that even if it gets painted, you can still see it. And as it weathers a couple of years. And in the case of this one, this is box number 4 that we've built. So I'm going to stamp a number in it as well. And the same thing here. So you can see I put a number in both parts so you know which way it goes, and that way when you've got a big mess and you're cleaning up, you put everything back together when you're all done with planting or next spring. It's easy to find everything again. All right, this is, for my part, it's complete. Now we're going to go out to the greenhouse and Sukey's going to fill these up and plant some seeds in them.